Amelia Brooks stood in front of the small mirror inside the staff changing room, breathing heavily. The store was busy, customers were everywhere, and her shift had just begun. As she quickly pulled her uniform dress over her head, she heard a loud rip. She froze. The sound echoed like thunder in her ears. "No, no, no, not today," she whispered, looking down at the long tear running across the side of her dress. This was her only work dress. Amelia worked at Elegance Fashion Store, a place full of expensive clothes she could never afford. Her salary barely covered rent and medicines for her younger sister, Lila. She couldn't afford a new dress, not even a used one. She grabbed the torn fabric with shaking hands. "If Mr. Grant sees this, he will fire me," she whispered, tears building in her eyes. The thought of losing her job sent a wave of panic through her. Without this job, how would she care for Lila? How would they survive? She felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She tried to fix it with safety pins, but they kept slipping off the thin material, making the tear even more noticeable. She tried to cover it with her long hair, but the rip was too big, too obvious. Her heart raced, pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. She felt completely helpless, trapped by her own poverty in a store that sold luxury. At that very moment, a black luxury car pulled up outside the store. People on the street stopped to stare, whispering as the sleek vehicle came to a silent halt. Inside sat Nathan Halley, the billionaire CEO of Halley Enterprises. Known throughout the city for his sharp intelligence and cold, untouchable personality, he rarely visited small retail shops like this one. But today was different. He was looking for a simple gift for his mother's birthday. Something personal, something thoughtful, not just another expensive item from a catalog. "Mason, I won't take long," Nathan said to his driver, his voice low and steady as he stepped out of the car. "Yes, sir," Mason replied, watching his boss with a respectful nod. As Nathan walked into the store, every employee suddenly stood straighter, their professionalism dialed up to the maximum. Customers turned their heads, their conversations dying down. It was impossible not to notice him, tall, confident, and dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit that screamed power and wealth. But Nathan wasn't looking at anyone. His eyes scanned the place, calm and uninterested, his mind focused only on his task. Until he stopped. He saw her, Amelia. She stood near a corner, trying to hide the torn side of her dress, her face flushed with embarrassment. She looked fragile, worried, and completely out of place in the bright, polished luxury store. Nathan didn't know why, but something about her vulnerable expression pulled at him. It was a look he recognized, the look of someone carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders, all alone. Without a second thought, he took a step toward her. Amelia kept her head down, her gaze fixed on the floor. She didn't want anyone, especially not a rich-looking customer like him, to see her in this state. She tried to move sideways, hoping to stay hidden behind a rack of clothes, but her foot slipped on the polished floor. She stumbled, bumping hard into a mannequin. The mannequin teetered for a moment, then fell with a loud, echoing crash. Silence fell over the store. Everyone turned to look. Her heart stopped. "Amelia," Mr. Grant shouted, his voice sharp and angry as he stormed toward her. "What is wrong with you today? Look at the mess you created." I'm sorry, sir, it was an accident," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her body trembled, and she felt a fresh wave of shame wash over her. Mr. Grant's eyes narrowed, his face twisting with irritation. "Fix your dress. You look unprofessional. If you can't handle your job properly, you know where the door is." Tears filled her eyes, blurring her vision, but she held them back. She couldn't afford to cry. She couldn't afford to be fired. She needed this job. She needed the money for Lila, so she just stood there, taking the humiliation in silence. Just as Mr. Grant turned away, a deep, calm voice cut through the tension. It was not her fault. Amelia looked up slowly, her tear-filled eyes wide with surprise. Nathan Halley stood there, watching her with calm but incredibly sharp eyes. Mr. Grant immediately changed his tone, his angry expression replaced with a fawning smile. "Oh, Mr. Halley, I didn't see you. Welcome, sir. How can I help you today? Anything you need? Just say the word." Nathan ignored him completely. He stepped closer to Amelia, his presence a comforting shield. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, his voice gentle in a way that made her feel seen. Amelia blinked, confused and overwhelmed. No one had spoken to her with such kindness in a very long time. I'm fine," she whispered, instinctively trying to cover the tear in her dress again with her hand. Nathan noticed the small movement. His eyes moved from her frightened face to the torn fabric, to her shaky hands, and he understood everything in an instant. The fear, the shame, the desperation, it was all there. "Please don't worry," he said gently, his gaze returning to her eyes. Accidents happen. Her eyes widened. Why was this powerful, imposing billionaire comforting her, a clumsy shop girl? It didn't make any sense. Mr. Grant, sensing he was losing control, stepped closer again. Sir, the girl can be clumsy at times. A bit of a liability. I will deal with her. Nathan cut him off with a look so cold it could freeze fire. You will do nothing, he said firmly, his voice low but carrying an undeniable authority that silenced the entire store. She didn't do anything wrong. Everyone stared, the air thick with shock. Amelia felt her heartbeat loud in her ears. No one had ever stood up for her, not like this. Not ever. Nathan glanced one last time at her torn dress, and then back at her face. In that moment, he made a silent promise to himself. He didn't know who this girl was or what her story was, but he knew, with absolute certainty, that he was coming back for her. This was only the beginning. What happens next? Will Nathan save Amelia from her cruel boss? Harper's day started earlier than usual. She'd barely slept, her mind replaying the same moment over and over, the moment Jackson read. The youngest billionaire CEO in the city picked up her broken dress and spoke to her as if she actually mattered. She had never met someone like him before. Men like Jackson lived in a completely different world. A world of luxury cars, private offices, and the kind of power she could only dream about. And still he had looked at her as if she wasn't invisible. Harper shook her head, trying to clear the thought as she stepped onto the morning bus. Don't be so silly, she whispered to herself. He probably forgot all about you already, but a small, hopeful part of her wondered, what if he didn't? Meanwhile, Jackson Reed sat in the back of his sleek black car, restlessly tapping his fingers on the leather seat. He had a crucial meeting with investors in an hour, but his mind wasn't on business at all. It was on Hurt, the girl with the broken dress and the trembling voice. Harper, he didn't know why she stayed in his thoughts. He'd met thousands of people in his life, but none of them left an impression quite like she did. There was something so pure about her, something so honest, something that made his cold, calculated world feel warm for the first time in years. Sir, should we head straight to the office? His driver asked, glancing in the rearview mirror. Jackson paused for a moment. No, he said finally. Take me to Riverside Cafe. The driver blinked, surprised, but didn't question the command. Nobody ever questioned Jackson Reed. Harper reached her workplace, the small, cozy cafe where she worked long, tiring shifts for very little money. She tied her apron and took a deep breath. She did like the cafe, even if the pay was low. The customers were simple, her coworkers were kind, and the smell of coffee was always comforting. But today felt different. Today she felt a strange nervousness, as if something big was about to happen. As she stood behind the counter, methodically arranging cups, the cafe bell rang. Ding! Harper turned her head, and she froze. Jackson Reed walked in. It felt like time itself stopped. Her breath caught in her throat. Her heart started pounding so loudly she felt sure everyone in the small cafe could hear it. His eyes searched the room until they found hers. A small, warm smile touched his lips. The kind of genuine smile she never imagined a powerful billionaire would give a simple girl like her. Jackson walked straight to the counter, not even glancing at the other customers who were now whispering amongst themselves, recognizing him from business news and headlines. Good morning, Harper, he said softly, his voice low and calm, as if greeting an old friend. Harper almost dropped the cup in her hand. You remember me? She stammered, her voice barely a whisper. How could I forget? Jackson replied, his eyes gentle and focused only on her. Her cheeks heated up, and she had no idea what to say. He leaned slightly closer across the counter. I wanted to check if your dress is all right. Or if you are all right. No one had ever asked her something like that. Not with that kind of real concern in their voice. It made her chest tighten with an unfamiliar emotion. Oh, I'm fine, she whispered, her eyes cast down. Thank you. For yesterday, you don't have to thank me, he said, but I do have one concern. Her eyes widened in alarm. Concern? Just. Yes. He walked around the counter, closing the distance between them, and lowered his voice so only she could hear. You never told me your dream? Harper froze again. He remembered. He had actually listened to her rambling words from the night before. I don't know if I have one anymore, she admitted quietly. Life is very hard. Jackson's jaw tightened, not in anger at her, but at the world that had made her feel this way. Then let me help you find it again. Her breath hitched. She looked up at him, bewildered. Why would you help me? You don't even know me. Jackson looked directly into her eyes, his gaze intense and unwavering. Well, I wanted. Before Harper could even begin to process his words, her manager rushed over, his eyes wide with a mix of awe and panic. Sir, Mr. Reed. What an honor, please. Sit down. Anything you need, it's on the house. Jackson lifted a hand calmly, never taking his eyes off Harper. Relax. I'm just here to talk to Harper. The manager's face went completely blank from shock. And in that moment, Harper felt the whole world tilt on its axis. Why was he doing this? Why her? Jackson pulled out a small, elegant business card and placed it gently on the counter in front of her. Harper, when your shift ends, please call me. Her fingers trembled as she picked up the card. It was heavy, and on it was his personal number. His private line. Jackson gave her one last soft smile before turning and walking towards the exit, leaving a wake of stunned silence behind him. Harper stood frozen, the card clutched tightly to her chest, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Her world had completely changed. Again, everything around her, the smell of coffee, the whispers of customers, the shocked face of her manager faded away. Only one thought remained, echoing in her mind. Why would a billionaire want anything? Ella Parker couldn't believe what had just happened. She had barely recovered from the sheer embarrassment of her dress ripping at the gala. And now, she was facing an even more complicated problem. How to act around William Foster. Yes, the William Foster, the billionaire CEO who had so publicly noticed her at her most vulnerable moment. It felt like a dream, or maybe a nightmare. She wasn't sure which. Ever since that night, he seemed to appear everywhere she went. It wasn't in a creepy or threatening way, not at all. It was more like he was a quiet, constant presence, a shadow that made her heart race and her thoughts scatter like confetti in the wind. He had this uncanny ability to show up at her favorite coffee shop or at the park where she liked to read, always with a disarming smile and a casual greeting that felt anything but casual. Then came the invitation. William had invited her to his company's charity event. He claimed it was simply to apologize properly for the dress incident, a gesture of goodwill. But Ella couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more behind his polite smile and those piercing blue eyes. Billionaires were supposed to be cold, distant, untouchable, gods living on a different plane of existence. That's what she'd always thought, but William wasn't like that. He was attentive, he was kind, and he seemed genuinely interested in her, in a way that felt both confusing and incredibly flattering. Ella kept replaying that one moment from the gala in her mind, the way he had leaned in, the way he had whispered that one single sentence. It was a sentence that made her cheeks burn and her mind whirl, as if he had somehow peered into her soul and read her deepest, most unspoken thoughts. The memory of his voice, low and warm against her ear, haunted her. It was like a sweet, addictive melody she just couldn't get out of her head, despite all her worries and the insecurities that screamed at her to run the other way. She found herself anticipating his messages. She'd catch herself staring at her phone, counting the hours until she might see him again, even if it was just a fleeting glance across a crowded room. Her life was a world away from his. She had bills to pay, a tiny apartment to maintain, and a job that barely covered her expenses. She couldn't afford to lose focus, to get swept up in some fairy tale that was bound to end in heartbreak. And yet, she couldn't ignore the strange, magnetic pull she felt toward William O'Poole that was equal parts thrilling and terrifying. Tonight was the night of the charity event. It felt like a crossroads. Ella had a choice. She could either hide in the background, blend into the shadows like she always did, safe and invisible. Or she could step into the spotlight, risk another round of public humiliation, and open herself up to something she had never, ever experienced before. William had already arrived. Of course, he looked impeccable in a tailored suit, the aura of power and wealth surrounding him like a tangible force. But as she watched him from across the room, he seemed more human than anyone she had ever met. He wasn't just a headline or a name on a building. He was a man with a surprisingly gentle smile. As the evening unfolded, he found her by the refreshment table. She was trying her best to look casual, pretending she wasn't completely overwhelmed by the opulence around her. He leaned against the table, a picture of relaxed confidence, seemingly unaware of the attention he was drawing. "Ella," he said softly. His voice carried a warmth that instantly cut through the noise of the room, making her forget everything else. "I'm glad you came." She tried to respond naturally, to say something witty or charming, but her voice caught in her throat. She felt a blush creep up her neck, a familiar heat of embarrassment mixed with something else, something new. How could one person make her feel so exposed and yet so strangely safe at the same time? William had a way of looking at her that seemed to see right through her defenses, through the walls she had so carefully built around her heart. It was a look that both frightened and excited her in a way she couldn't explain. With him, every laugh she gave felt like it had significance. Every simple word she spoke seemed to be a treasure in his eyes. She couldn't understand it. Why would a man who could have anyone or anything in the world care so much about her simple, imperfect self? The night grew longer, and the conversations flowed around them. But Ella's mind was always drawn back to him, to the subtle glances they shared, and the unspoken promises that seemed to linger in the air between them. She felt something shift inside her. It was as if an invisible thread had suddenly connected her life with William's, a connection she could no longer deny. Every decision, every thought, every single heartbeat now seemed to revolve around him. But just as she started to relax, just as she allowed herself to feel a flicker of tentative happiness, she noticed a change in him. A guest walked by and mentioned a rival CEO. Instantly, a shadow crossed William's features. His jaw tightened, his eyes darkened, and for a split second, Ella caught a glimpse of the guarded, ruthless man beneath the charming exterior. And in that moment, she understood. His world wasn't just glamorous parties and fancy suits. It was complicated, competitive, and maybe even dangerous. Being a part of it could change her life in ways she couldn't even begin to imagine. Fear, excitement, and a burning curiosity collided inside her. This wasn't just a simple attraction. This was the beginning of a story. A love story that could either lift her into a life she had only ever dreamed of, or shatter her completely. And as she looked at him, as he turned back to her with that same warm smile, a silent decision was made. She would follow this path, no matter how uncertain or terrifying it seemed. Because the pull between her and William was something neither of them could deny. It was a force stronger than any obstacle, stronger than any fear, stronger than anything she had ever known before. And for the first time in her life, Ella Parker was ready to take the risk. The days after the charity event were a whirlwind for Ella. She couldn't stop thinking about William Foster, his commanding presence, the way he made her feel seen when no one else had ever looked at her that way. She tried to focus on her work, on the small, familiar routine that kept her life in order, but it was impossible. Every unexpected text, every surprise phone call from him, pulled her deeper into a world that felt so far beyond her reach. His voice on the phone was a low, warm hum that vibrated through her, making her forget where she was or what she was doing. He'd ask about her day, about the little things, and listen with an intensity that made her feel like she was the only person in the world. One afternoon, sunlight warming the pavement, she was walking home from her job at the boutique. Her mind was a tangle of thoughts about William, about the sheer improbability of it all. Lost in her daydreams, she almost didn't notice at the sleek, black car parked across the street. It was the same one from the night of the event. Her heart gave a little jump. William's driver stepped out, his face impassive. Before she could duck away and pretend she hadn't seen him, he called her name, Ella. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a confusing mix of fear and excitement tightening her chest. Then, the back door opened, and William himself stepped out. He was dressed in a tailored suit that seemed to radiate power and sophistication, but all she saw were his eyes. The moment they met hers, they softened, crinkling at the corners. "Ella," he said, his voice a quiet reassurance. He walked toward her, closing the distance between them. "I hope I'm not intruding." He offered a small, almost shy smile. She just shook her head, unable to find her voice. Her throat felt tight. He was standing right in front of her, on her street, in her world. It felt like a scene from a movie. He held out a small, crisp envelope. Her fingers trembled slightly as she took it. Inside, she found 2 tickets. Not just any tickets, but an invitation to a weekend getaway at a luxurious, secluded resort she had only ever seen in magazines. "I thought you might need a break," he said, his gaze fixed on her, watching her reaction carefully. Ella was stunned. A million thoughts flooded her mind, crashing into each other. She had never, not in her wildest dreams, imagined someone like William Foster would think of her in this way, let alone invite her into his world of opulence and ease. But with the breathtaking invitation came a familiar, nagging doubt. What did he really want? Was this just a grand gesture of kindness from a wealthy man who could afford it? Or was there something deeper, something he wasn't saying? The cynical voice in her head, the one that had protected her for so long, whispered warnings of disappointment. As she wrestled with her feelings, her expression must have given her away. William gently took her hand. His touch was warm, his grip firm, yet gentle, grounding her. "Ella, I know life hasn't been easy for you," he said, his voice low and sincere. "I don't want to complicate it, but I can't ignore how I feel." The raw honesty in his words made her heart ache. It was the one thing she hadn't expected. She wanted so desperately to trust him, to believe in the undeniable spark that had ignited between them. But her past, filled with struggles and the sting of being let down, made her hesitate. Fear was a wall she had built around her heart, brick by brick. That night, she lay in her small apartment, the city lights painting patterns on her ceiling. The envelope with the tickets sat on her bedside table, a silent, powerful promise. She thought about the way William looked at her, truly looked at her, as if he was memorizing her face. She remembered the way he listened, tilting his head slightly, and the way he seemed to care in a world where she had learned that very few people ever did. She let herself imagine the weekend, the crisp white sheets, the scent of the ocean, the feeling of finally being able to breathe. She imagined stepping into a life filled with luxury and romance. But with that beautiful image came the risk of losing herself, of becoming just another character in his glamorous story, only to be written out when the chapter ended. Was she strong enough to handle that? The next morning, the decision was made for her. A soft knock echoed through her apartment. When she opened the door, William was standing there. His presence was calm, yet completely overwhelming, filling her small doorway. He was here, to pick her up. In that moment, Ella realized her life was about to change, in ways she could never have imagined. There was no turning back now. As they drove out of the city, the familiar gray landscape transformed. She saw the world differently, not just as a place of struggle and survival, but as a vast landscape of possibilities, of adventures, and maybe, just maybe, of a love that could transform her entirely. The car was a quiet, intimate bubble, moving through the world. To her surprise, William started sharing stories. He spoke of his childhood, not of privilege, but of the loneliness that came with it. He talked about his fears, the immense pressure of his name, and the emptiness that all his wealth could never fill. Ella listened, captivated. She was surprised by how vulnerable he allowed himself to be. She began to understand that behind the powerful CEO, the man on magazine covers, was just a man longing for connection, for someone who could see him for who he truly was, beyond the money and the power. The drive was filled with these quiet revelations. There were long stretches of comfortable silence that spoke louder than words. There was laughter that echoed like music, a sound she hadn't realized she'd been missing, and there were stolen glances, quick and intense, that hinted at the powerful emotions they were both trying to hide, and failing. By the time they arrived at the resort, a stunning oasis nestled by the sea, Ella felt a dizzying mixture of anticipation and nervousness. The air smelled of salt and flowers. This weekend felt like a turning point, a step into a love that was both incredibly thrilling and utterly terrifying. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if this would end in heartbreak or happiness. But as she got out of the car and looked at William, who was standing there with a gentle, patient smile, she realized that some things, like the pull of her heart toward another, could not be resisted. This was more than just a fleeting attraction. It felt like destiny unfolding right before her eyes. And for the first time in a very long time, she was ready to let it take her wherever it might lead. The weekend at the resort started like a fairy tale. William had arranged a private suite with a stunning view of the ocean, and as I stepped onto the balcony, I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't experienced in years. The cool sea breeze on my skin, the rhythmic sound of the waves crashing belly, was all so perfect. Almost too perfect. I had to keep reminding myself that dreams like this could shatter just as easily as they formed. Beneath all the beauty and serenity, there was a tension I couldn't quite shake. It felt like every move I made was being carefully watched by William. He wasn't pushy or overbearing, and he didn't make any grand, dramatic declarations. But the way he looked at me, that subtle intensity in his gaze, it made my heart race with a strange mix of excitement and fear. We spent that first day just exploring the resort. We walked along hidden trails, our footsteps cushioned by fallen leaves. We laughed at silly jokes, our voices echoing in the quiet air. We shared meals in secluded corners, tucked away from the rest of the world. With every hour that passed, I felt the walls I had built so carefully around my heart begin to crumble, piece by piece. But even as I started to let go, the memories of my past struggles, of a life filled with hardship and uncertainty, clung to me like shadows. That evening, we had dinner under a sky filled with stars. The setting was incredibly romantic. William leaned in closer, his hand gently brushing against mine. The simple touch sent a jolt through me, making me catch my breath. "Ella," he said, his voice so soft it was almost lost in the sound of the waves. "I don't want you to feel pressured, but I need you to know how I feel. I've never met anyone like you before." I looked into his eyes and saw such sincerity, such warmth. But I also saw something I didn't expect: vulnerability. It surprised me. I wanted to respond, to tell him how I was feeling, but the words just wouldn't come. It felt like anything I could say would be inadequate. So, I just smiled, hoping my silence could convey what my heart wasn't ready to speak. Later, as we returned to the suite, a storm suddenly rolled in from the sea. The rain began to lash against the windows, and thunder rumbled in the distance. I shivered, but not from the cold. The air between us was electric, charged with unspoken feelings. William noticed and offered me his jacket, draping it over my shoulders. I felt the warmth of his body, the steady, reassuring beat of his heart against my back. "You don't have to be afraid," he whispered. In that moment, the storm raging outside felt like a perfect mirror of the whirlwind inside me, a beautiful chaos, a collision of fear and desire. We spent the next few hours just talking. We shared secrets we had never told anyone else, dreams we had held on to, and fears that kept us awake at night. As he opened up to me, I realized that William was so much more than the powerful, billionaire CEO the world saw. He was someone who had known loneliness, who had faced disappointment, and who understood the immense weight of responsibility. I started to see the incredible depth beneath his confident exterior, and I felt honored that he trusted me enough to share his heart. But just as I started to relax, to let myself imagine a future where William and I could actually be together, a phone call shattered the moment. I watched as William's face darkened. He spoke in a low, tense voice, and my heart sank. I couldn't understand all the words, but I heard enough phrases about threats, business rivalries, something dangerous that was now creeping into our seemingly perfect weekend. The safe little bubble we had created was not as secure as I thought. William tried to reassure me, his hand tightening around mine, but the tension in his eyes told a different story. It was clear there were forces at play far beyond my understanding, far beyond our control. I realized that falling in love, as thrilling as it was, could also bring complications and risks I had never anticipated. And yet, despite the sudden danger, despite the uncertainty, despite the storm that was still raging outside, I felt an undeniable pull toward him. It was a connection so strong, so profound, that it felt like nothing in the world could break it. That night, as the rain fell harder and the wind howled, I made a silent promise to myself. No matter what obstacles came our way, I would face them with William by my side. Because in his presence, I had found a love that was worth every risk, every fear, and every single moment of doubt. And I knew, deep down, that our story was only just beginning. It would be a story that would test us, challenge us, and ultimately bind us together in ways neither of us could have ever imagined. The next day at the resort brought a strange mix of beauty and tension that Ela just could and shake. The sun was shining brilliantly, casting a golden, shimmering light over the vast ocean. It looked like paradise, but there was a heaviness in the air, a silent warning that with William Foster, life was never going to be simple. They spent the morning walking along the shoreline. The waves gently lapped at the sand, and their hands would occasionally brush against each other. Each time they touched, sparks shot through Ella's chest, making her forget everything else for just a moment. But William seemed unusually quiet, completely lost in his own thoughts, and a knot of worry began to form in Ella's stomach. "Is something wrong?" she finally asked, her voice soft and tinged with concern. He stopped walking and turned to face her. A faint smile touched his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. "It's nothing for you to worry about," he said, but the strained tone in his voice completely betrayed him. Ella decided not to press him further. She sensed this was one of those walls he built around his life. Walls that seemed so strong, yet somehow fragile at the same time. They returned to the suite for lunch, and as they were eating, a sudden, sharp knock at the door made them both freeze. A man in a crisp, sharp suit stood there. He wordlessly handed William an envelope, his expression tight and unreadable, and then left just as quickly as he had appeared. William opened the envelope with careful, deliberate movements. As he read its contents, his face hardened into a mask of stone. Ella's stomach plummeted. She could feel the tension radiating off him in waves, a dangerous cocktail of anger, fear, and sheer determination. "Ella," he said quietly, his voice low but steady, "there's something you should know about me. About my world. It's complicated, and it's not always safe." Her heart started racing, pounding against her ribs, but she just nodded, bracing herself for whatever truth he was about to share. William began to explain. He told her about his business, about ruthless rivals who would stop at nothing to gain an edge. He confessed that some people wanted to harm not just him, but anyone close to him. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a deep regret, and explained that her presence, though completely innocent, had put her in danger. Ella's mind was a whirlwind. Fear and shock battled against the undeniable, magnetic pull of love she felt for him. It was terrifying, but as she looked at him, she didn't see a billionaire CEO surrounded by danger. She saw the man she had grown to trust, the man who had opened his heart to her in ways no one else ever had. "I don't want to lose you," he confessed, his hand covering hers on the table. The weight of his words settled in her chest, feeling less like a confession and more like a solemn promise. She squeezed his hand, a silent vow that she wasn't going anywhere. Later that evening, with the storm of emotion still swirling inside them, they walked back out to the balcony that overlooked the ocean. The sky was on fire, blazing with the brilliant colors of the sunset, painting the waves in strokes of gold and crimson. For a breathtaking moment, the chaotic world outside seemed to just disappear, leaving only the two of them. William pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. Ella could feel the steady, rhythmic beat of his heart against her chest. A solid, grounding reassurance that amidst all the chaos, there was this moment. This was theirs, and theirs alone. They didn't speak. The silence was full, charged with unspoken meaning, a promise of protection, a foundation of trust, and a connection so deep it felt electric. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the suite directly below them, shattering the perfect stillness. It was a harsh, brutal reminder that danger was never far away, not even in this supposed paradise. William's eyes narrowed instantly, a flash of fierce determination replacing the softness that was there just moments before. In that instant, Ella realized something profound. Loving him meant stepping into a world of challenges she had never imagined, facing risks she could never have predicted. It wasn't just about stolen kisses and romantic dinners. But as she held his hand, a surge of unexpected courage washed over her. For the first time, she truly understood that love wasn't just about happiness or comfort. It was about standing together, side by side, facing down fear, and protecting what mattered most. As night fell and the storm of the outside world raged on, Ella knew with absolute certainty that her heart was irrevocably tied to William's. The bond between them felt unshakable. She knew that no obstacle, no amount of danger, could ever diminish the love that had blossomed between a poor girl with a broken dress and the billionaire CEO who had fallen deeply, completely, and irrevocably in love with her. Their story was just beginning, and she was ready for whatever came next. As long as they faced it together, the final night at the resort felt heavier than any of the days before. It was as if the air itself was trying to warn us. I could feel it in every step, every glance I shared with William. We'd spent the day trying to act normal, walking along the beach, laughing at silly jokes, just soaking up the quiet intimacy that had grown between us. But underneath all the laughter, there was this tension, this unspoken reminder that William's world was a complicated place. It was filled with rivals and threats, a reality so far removed from my simple life. I watched him from a distance, noticing the tiny lines of worry on his forehead, the way his eyes constantly scanned the horizon, like he was expecting danger to just appear out of thin air. But despite all that, the pull I felt toward him was stronger than anything I'd ever known. It was both terrifying and exhilarating. That evening, as the sun dipped below the ocean, painting the sky in deep purples and golds, William led me to a secluded cliffside overlooking the water. The wind whipped around us, carrying the salty scent of the sea and the thrill of the unknown. He held my hand so tightly, a silent promise that we were in this together. My heart swelled with a mix of fear and hope. He turned to me, his voice low and steady. "Ella," he said, "these past few days with you have changed everything. You've shown me a world beyond power, beyond money, beyond everything I thought mattered. You've reminded me what it feels like to truly care for someone, to be vulnerable and yet strong at the same time." I looked up at him, my eyes getting misty. "William, I couldn't even finish the sentence. The words just weren't enough for everything I was feeling." He gently cupped my face, brushing a stray piece of hair behind my ear, and leaned in. "You don't need to say anything," he whispered. "I know." The wind howled around us, and for a second, the world just disappeared, leaving only the two of us suspended in that perfect moment. But then, the quiet was shattered. The sudden blare of sirens and the roar of a vehicle racing toward us broke the spell. William's face hardened instantly, his body tensed, ready to protect me at any cost. My heart hammered against my ribs as he pulled me behind a large rock, shielding me from view. A man I'd never seen before emerged from the shadows. He clearly belonged to the dangerous side of William's life, a rival, there to send a message. William confronted him with this calm authority, but his eyes never left mine, silently urging me to stay hidden, to stay safe. A tense moment stretched between them, thick with unspoken threats and the heavy weight of danger. The stranger finally retreated, but not without a warning. This game wasn't over. William's hand trembled just slightly as he turned back to me. A flicker of fear crossed his eyes before he masked it with his usual confidence. "Ella," he said, his voice steady but urgent, "you need to understand. Being with me means entering a world where this kind of danger is real. I will never let anything happen to you, but you have to be prepared." I looked into his eyes and saw the truth in his words. I saw the fierce protectiveness and the love that was burning so brightly, despite all the risks. I took a deep breath, my resolve strengthening. "I'm not afraid," I said softly. "Not when I'm with you. I trust you, William, and I want to face everything together." A wave of relief and awe washed over his face, and for the first time in days, a genuine smile softened his intense expression. We stayed there on that cliffside for a long time, watching the moon rise over the ocean, letting the silence say everything we couldn't. In that quiet moment, I realized that love wasn't about being comfortable or safe. It was about trust, courage, and being willing to step into the unknown with someone who truly cares. The next morning, we returned to the resort, knowing we couldn't stay in our little bubble forever. William had meetings to attend, decisions to make, and enemies to face, but now, he had me by his side. I grounded him, reminded him of what really mattered, and gave him the courage to face challenges he'd always endured alone. And I felt a change in myself, too. The girl who once panicked over a torn dress had found a new kind of strength, resilience, and a heart that was capable of loving deeply, even in the face of fear. Together, we navigated the complexities of William's world. There were public appearances, business pressures, and the constant shadow of his rivals. But we faced it all as a team, and our love grew stronger with every trial. We laughed, we argued, we held each other, and we supported one another. We discovered that even in a life of unimaginable wealth and power, it was the simple moments that truly mattered, the shared meals, the quiet walks, the whispered confessions in the middle of the night. Slowly, the world started to notice the bond between the billionaire CEO and the girl who had somehow captured his heart. Rumors spread, people were envious, and skeptics doubted we would last. But William and I remained steadfast. Our love was unshaken by judgment or challenge. In our private moments, we'd reflect on how far we'd come. From a broken dress and an awkward first meeting to a love that was intense, unwavering, and had completely changed our lives. We celebrated milestones, we faced setbacks, and we learned that love requires patience, forgiveness, and the courage to trust each other completely. Months later, on a quiet evening, William took me back to that same cliffside where the storm had first threatened us. This time, the ocean shimmered peacefully under the moonlight, and the wind carried memories of both fear and triumph. He knelt on one knee, holding out a simple, elegant ring. His eyes were filled with so much love, devotion, and hope. Tears streamed down my face as I realized that our entire journey, the struggles, the laughter, the danger, the tenderness, had all led to this perfect moment. I nodded, whispering a heartfelt yes, and threw my arms around him. We had found something so rare and precious, a love that had been tested, proven, and was destined to endure. Together, we looked out at the horizon. The future was still uncertain, but it was full of promise. We were ready to face whatever life might bring, bound by a connection that no amount of money, fear, or circumstance could ever break. The poor girl who had once struggled with a dress had changed her life, and in doing so, had captured the heart of a billionaire CEO, creating a love story that would be remembered forever.